Anita, I got a question for you. What's something that you've done that recently puts you in a very relaxed mood, like you were in the right headspace, that you just kind of was like, wow, this feels really good?
So this is like perfect timing for me. Probably not by the time this podcast released, but how we're recording it, my birthday was just last week. Um, so I actually spent it at a spa, and honestly, it's one of those spas where like they have multiple rooms. You can spend the day, a lot of different like sauna, infrared, salt cave. Like it's like a couple of floors, like it's massive. Okay. So I got gift certificates. So I went there with my mom, and my sisters. It's the first time I went to a spa and I brought a book with me.
Mhm.
So there's like beds, like we spent hours there. We were in the pools. We had a massage done. Honestly, the best day ever. So it wasn't like, oh, you did a 1 hour massage and you could still feel great. This was a full day experience. The day was blocked off. There was nothing. Phone was off because I didn't bring my phone in, with me. It was fantastic. I got to tell you, it was awesome.
Excellent. And I apologize. I am really not a good co-host or friend that I basically forgot to say happy birthday to you. Okay.
Said once you pass like the ripe age of, I'll say 30, you never want anyone to know it's your birthday. You're
You
like, let's
sound
keep this on down low.
You sound like my family members now. That is hilarious. They told me, stop telling people your age. It makes us look older. I'm like, okay now.
Almost a year, Jen.
Well, I was facilitating this kind of class for my church, and we were doing this new kind of where you just become silent and still, and there is just try to like lose yourself in the silence and just don't think about anything. And I did it, and it just felt so good. I can't really explain it, but it was just like no thoughts going on the head, and you're in this silence. I know some people are listening to me like, how do you do that? Because they can't stay still. But it was just the most amazing feeling. And I wanted to stay in there. And then because of the time, we had it set at a time, we had to come back. But it felt so relaxing and almost like I was floating.
Yeah, I'm one of those listeners right now saying, how in the world do you do that? And the only thing I can relate to that is I went for a walk and forgot my earbuds. And the worst thing was like, I had my phone with me, but I'm like, okay, I can't turn it on. Like, I can't hear. So I'm on a walk with nothing but my own thoughts. That's horrible, Chin. I want my own thoughts on my walk.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point. It was like, just quiet all the thoughts and get lost in the silence. That's what was the amazing thing, because there was no thoughts going, just being in the silence. And it felt good because it quiet down your mind. What about you, Isabelle? What's something you recently done that put you in a real good headspace or really relaxed you?
Well, I would say I actually do this every morning because I need it for my well-being and my mental health. I live by the lake in Toronto, and I take my beautiful border collie for a walk out every morning. But I don't just simply walk. I call it my gratitude walk.
Yeah.
So I have a list of like 50 things that I'm the most grateful for. And sometimes they change a little bit depending on which season of the year it is. But I just go through all these things that I'm grateful for. And it just brings, not only it's healthy to walk outside, but it just brings so much happiness because, gratefulness is the ultimate state of receivership, and it just brings happiness to people. So I would highly recommend it as a
Yeah.
habit.
Oh my God, that's amazing. The only thing I'm like, 50, Isabel? I mean, I get it. I mean, how did you remember 50 things? That's amazing. That's it's a lot to remember, but that I could just imagine how much you're feeling
Yeah.
not only grateful, but happy and joyous and really enriched by life when you do that. That's an amazing practice. Thank you for sharing. If you're wondering what we're talking about today, we're doing reimagining leadership well-being. And so I ask you, HR leaders, people first executives, and L&D professionals, if you're listening today, I want you to think about, what is my role in making sure that we're creating space and opportunities for well-being in leadership? And what practices do we have today that may be outdated, that need to be looked at? And what are some things that we might be able to introduce from listening to this site? Now, if you're wondering, hey, it's usually Anita and Chen, who is Isabelle? I'm going to hand it over to Anita to share who we have today.
Today we've got Isabelle Tremblay, my senior marketing executive, business development leader, fractional CMO, executive coach, speaker, best-selling author, and podcast host, with more than 25 years of experience helping organizations grow with strategy, purpose, and heart. As the founder and chief marketing officer at Reimagining, she supports organizations and senior leaders through marketing strategy, brand positioning, business development, executive advisory, leadership coaching, and speaking. Her background includes senior leadership roles where she's led national marketing strategies, strengthened customer engagement, and supported commercial growth across 42 brands and products. She's also the best-selling author of Love, Lead, Succeed, The Supernatural Approach to Business and Life. She's co-founder and co-host of Eye on the Industry podcast and founder and host of Love, Lead, Succeed podcast. Her work centers on business growth, emotional intelligence, purpose-driven leadership, executive renewal, and love as a powerful leadership strategy. So who better than to have with us than Isabelle Tremblay talking about reimagining leadership well-being? But so Isabelle, before we go any further, is there anything that maybe that's not in this amazing bio that maybe you want to share about yourself, like for the listeners, anything?
Well, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You made me feel really special. I would say one of the key role that's the most important in my life is that I'm a mother of two beautiful daughters, age 18 and 21, and they're really the pride of my life. So I just wanted to share that today because I'm, just mentioning them, I just feel, full of love.
I can
Isabelle, I
imagine.
hope they're one of your gratitude, one of your 50. No kidding.
Oh, they're definitely both part of they're like right at the beginning.
Okay.
Nice. Nice. I actually that's a tip for me. I love walking. So I'm with you, Isabelle. I think that walk for me I need it now as part of my daily. But what I've never done is incorporating that gratitude in part of it. So that's a tip for me. So I'm loving that. So I've already got a tip, Chen, from this episode.
That's what I love about Development Reimagined. We come up with all these nice insights and gems here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you don't really have to link your gratitude to walk to even anything. Just try an exercise once and go for a walk and say thank you at every step. And I dare you not to smile because when you say thank you, it just brings happiness in your life. So I recommend this practice.
Nice. I know we started off really talking about that rest and stuff like that, but I don't know about you, but when I think of the workplace, when we think about well-being, for me, it's like burnout tends to be that first word, right? We're always like, oh, our leaders, they're going to be burnt out. They're going to be burnt out. Is there what are the signs of that we're seeing in workplaces? Because then how does that then lead us eventually to that practice? But what are your thoughts around burnout in the workplace, Isabelle?
Yes. And I guess one of the challenges with the corporate world is a lot of people, they wear their exhaustion badge as a badge of honor. And we really celebrate the hustle culture. But one of the biggest sign, I would say, of burnout is really the lack of joy. It's usually the first sign. So you no longer feel excited about your work because you're working on adrenaline instead of energy. And one of the issue too with burnout is that it's often too late by the time you really realize you're burnout, because a lot of leaders and people in the executive world, they're overachievers, right? So you'll just keep pushing, and one day you'll feel really tired and you'll just blame it on last night because you feel like you didn't get a good night's sleep. So you're just tired because you didn't sleep. But in reality, it just creeps on you, and it becomes something for a lot of people that just really impacts their life to the point where they really have to take a mental and physical break from work and start taking care of their health.
Wow, what you said, a couple of things you said, but I wanted to ask you this question about, you said by the time people get to burnout, it's too late. Could you go a little bit deeper? What do you mean by that? You're saying that at that point, they need to do what? What do you mean by
Well,
it's too late?
they'll need at that point like a renewal or reset, they'll need to change how they live their life. Really, it's not only about work, right? And I can bring you to my personal story. I went to the top of this really large company in the optical industry, and I worked for them for over 23 years. But at the end of my career, I was doing two very high level positions within the same organizations. I was managing two teams, two budgets, and different currency and all of that, and over 20 people reporting to me. And I kept pushing through, and I mentioned to, HR that I was getting really tired, and I kept mentioning it, I was being tired. And I'm not saying that to blame it on the organization, because that's the thing with burnout. It's both a system problem and I guess, an individual problem. So we need to, create for the individual. We need to establish those loving boundaries. But how I discovered that I was completely burnout, it was after I probably had been burnout for a good 4 or 5 months. But one night I sat on my computer to draft an email, and it just took me 2 hours to draft two lines
Mm.
because I couldn't mentally function anymore. I couldn't think. And this is where, or when I went to see my family doctor, and then he diagnosed me with a situational stress disorder, which is a fancy word for burnout. And at that point, I really felt like a failure. And I think that's an important thing to mention about burnout, because there's a lot of like shame for some people. Because again, if we're overachiever, we want, get a lot of things done. And if you're spending your day in bed, not going to work, well, you're going to feel less pride in yourself. You're going to feel like failure, maybe to your kids, to your team at work. You're gone, and you left all this work behind. Who's going to do it, right? So it can really be a challenge, and once you are in that situation where you are burned out, then you need to really learn how to reset and really take care of your health.
Mhm. I I resonate so much with that right now, what you just said. And that shame, for me, that shame, because especially when I was feeling like overworked, but I am this high performer too, that's such a clash. And it did feel like, oh my goodness, if I go off on a leave, or if I actually take some significant time off for me, is that being selfish? What is, all those other things? Like, what does that mean? I'm going to leave the team with all that work to do, and they're going to be overworked. I was at the point where in my head, I was almost wishing to have something physically be wrong with me. Like, this is
Mhm.
crazy, where I was like, oh my gosh, can I just land in the hospital where I need to be away from work? Nothing bad enough where it's going to be serious or life threatening, just enough so I can be away from work for a significant, like, how sad is that? That I was preferring to be in a hospital than to take time off
Mhm.
or legitimately. Anyways, that's crazy. I don't know if anyone else out there listening can relate to that, but how sad is that? That's where my brain went as the alternative.
Right.
So,
No. Yeah, I don't know if it's as sad as real, because
uh,
I think, and I think Isabel can speak to this a little bit, but I think when you say you're high achiever, I think people bring their identity, their work, and what they do at their work is so much of their identity, right? I was listening to one of
yes.
Isabel's podcasts about that you not wanting to do something looks bad on you, right? You not wanting to do the work. So you're saying, hey, let me end up in a hospital, because really that's when organizations lean in to support you, only when you end up in the hospital or something. But Isabelle, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I always, like, I'm hearing this and I'm like, why do we do that? And I think it is that identity thing.
Well, it is because most people, and not only business people, but a lot of us, we just, measure the success of our life by output. So how much did we achieve today? How many emails did we answer? Oh, I'm so proud I was on 17 meetings today. That's amazing. And, we'll measure our life by titles or what kind of car you're driving. But this becomes a problem because if you have like this, I guess, this vision about your life, then when the work suddenly disappears or the title is no longer there, so how do you measure your success in life? So you really need to, be aligned with who you truly are and just, have that bigger vision because I think it could become a recipe for disaster when we just fully measure our success on achievements and output.
Yeah, exactly.
I find that aligns though almost. So not only like you speak about how our burnout to like both individual and the system, right? So individually we may take that on, right? Like which is what we just spoke with. But in an organization, we reward those who achieve. We push. We're saying, thank you so much for working, late on that, Isabelle. Like, and that's the message that gets sent to the team. You're like, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to Isabelle who worked tirelessly on this for days and whatever. But those are the messages, like someone who overworks, someone who overperforms. So I'm also seeing individually, like you said, here's where I believe my identity is tied to this, but the organization's almost feeding me that, or what's the word where,
It's
supporting that
promoting
or
it. It's promoting it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
because basically it's rewarding it, it's promoting it, and so you are being affirmed by them giving you that kind of praise or compliment for working so long. I think that's the next question. What do we do in the system besides the rewarding and encouraging? What are we currently doing that we probably should stop doing in terms of the things that lead to someone's burnout? What are some of those things you have observed, Isabelle?
Y- You mean in terms of in the organization, right?
Right.
That leads something to burnout. Yeah. Well, it's really the hustle culture in general. So people like corporation, they'll have a pretty mission on the wall that like talks about how much they love their employees. But often the systems they have in place are not necessarily fully there to protect the employees. They're there to achieve the results, right? The KPIs. And there's often the issue comes from the top too. Like I remember I can give you an example. At the end of my career with that corporation, I was working about 80 hours a week. And I remember one of the VP, one of my colleague, he asked me at some point, he's like, I've noticed that your team is not like working on the Google Drive on the weekend. And because we needed to achieve this big like pitch presentation for the budget presentation to senior leadership. And I challenged him back. I said, well, why are they supposed to work on the weekend, right? Like, aren't we supposed to establish like boundaries and, rest is so important as well. And I think the reasons why the expectations were there, well, people kept leaving the company, but they weren't being replaced. So people would like, wear different hats at the same time. But, where you see signs in, I guess, the culture and the organization is when you see things like that, right? The hustle culture, the text messages from work at 6 a.m. or 11 p.m., the deadlines that make you work on a presentation all night or all weekend. So organizations need really to establish systems where they allow their employees to rest, that they make mental health a conversation that can be that everybody can talk about openly. So they should, really establish strategies and programs in place to help employees not get to that point of burnout.
Right. That
that's
makes sense.
something to add. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, Chen.
No, go ahead.
I've got an example. Years ago, the same thing, like what you're saying, like, hey, organizations should do stuff. So here we are trying to put some mental health practices, giving people ideas of what they could do. even just simple as like walking and taking your lunch, like make sure you take your hour, your breaks and things like that. And I remember one leader calling me up and saying, Anita, all of this sounds great. In theory, I get it. I understand. I know I need to do this. She's like, I don't know how I'm going to put this into practice. You tell me I should take my lunch, but which email am I allowed to skip for an hour so that I don't get back to a customer when they're wanting to know where their shipment is? And I have to go back and be like, well, I need my hour break. Sorry. Like, she's like, there's so much pressure that we need to respond, and our objectives and KPIs are tied to response times. She's like, I don't have time for an hour lunch. So she's like, I get it. I got to work late at night. There's time zones. Where do you want me to find time to exercise? She's like, I don't know how you want me to put this.
Mm.
And at that point, I honestly didn't have a really good answer, other than like the whole, well, you got to take some ownership. But honestly, at the end of the day, like the work was putting so much pressure. I didn't know how to give her more hours in her day for herself. How would you have answered that, Isabel? Like, what tips would you give to people who are like, that all sounds all fine and dandy, but how do we put that into lived experience or practice?
Yeah, I think it's as much as an organizational problem as it is I guess, an individual responsibility to establish boundaries. And there's many ways you can establish boundaries. With first, you list your priorities and you say, today I'm only going to focus on these two. And then, there's these three meetings here. They don't align with my priorities. So I'm just going to cancel them. But when it becomes to a point where it's so overwhelming that you can't achieve any of your goals because there's just too much to do, well, this is when you should try to maybe first talk to your direct manager about it. And if not heard, you could try to have that discussion with HR. But if you're not being heard, your health is really not worth that organization. So it might be a sign that it's time for you to go and try to find a new role that would be with an organization that really respects their employees and has their well-being at heart.
And you do see people do that. And I think the one thing that I keep on seeing, especially when I'm in workshops with leaders, is this lack of communication between what you're just talking about, talk to someone. It's them holding it in because they think that if they talk, that means that they're not stepping up on the plate, right? But what I get confused about, because you mentioned you had two roles, and I've heard this in different conversations with Anita, what I get confused about, and maybe you could speak to this too, Anita, in organizational development, when you do lose people on the team, like what is the proper step? You know you've lost people on the team. Why is it the assumption that the current team now needs to pick up the slack? Why isn't there some kind of other thing put in place? And it seems like once these other team members that exist pick up the slack and things start moving, it might not be moving well for the individuals, but things start moving, everybody forgets that this person is actually working two jobs. I don't know if you can speak to your story too, Isabel, how you got there, and then maybe Anita, you chime in on from the organizational development aspect. Why do we keep on being silent about that? Because I see it over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, and it's not always the case, but a lot of those organizations are really big corporation that are like purely driven by P&L and profitability. So when an employee goes, especially it's towards the end of the year, it's time where you need to meet your numbers. So they don't want to replace that employee because that's money back into their bottom line. So then they'll just pile the work onto another employee. And then maybe the next year they'll decide still, oh, well, see, we don't need to replace that employee because the work is still being done. And this is where I keep saying, well, it's not only a system problem for organization, it's a personal responsibility for people to speak out. And if it's not working anymore and speaking out is not really being heard, then it's time to leave. And after my burnout, I made that brave decision to never go back to this organization. And it was one of the best decisions I made in my life because after that, after healing, I completely reinvented myself. As mentioned in my intro, I launched my own company, launched a book. I started being an executive coach. So you just have to establish those loving boundaries for yourself as well.
Okay, thank you. And Anita, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you just said, boundaries. I do think this new generation is doing far better job at doing that than I'll say my own, uh, plus 30, no, well, plus 30 years. Yeah, like than we ever did, right? I think that hustle culture, I do think it exists, and especially in like larger organizations. But I do think this generation coming up is, and even maybe too, as of COVID, I think that is the boundaries are starting to be there. And going back to your example, to when you said like, okay, now you had 4 people on your team, one is left, you have 3, the 3 pick up the slack, and now you're doing more work, and it's being done. So why do organizations forget? For me, I'm like, because the 3 are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If the 3 were just to put boundaries and be like, hey, I'll work extra for a week, or knowing you're recruiting, you know what I mean? And there's that recruiting time. The 3 will put the extra effort. But if you keep doing it and nothing's changing and the organization isn't recruiting or whatever, and if you're doing it, it either A, means you haven't set a boundary and you are on the verge of burnout like those other 3 people are, or maybe you didn't need that 4th person. Like then maybe, the organization just realized that actually this work could be done by 3. But at the end of the day, it's those 3 that are, I think, setting that rule or that precedent. Like if you can do it, then what would make them want to spend money on another headcount? So
Right.
put your boundaries. Say, I'll do this for a week, or, I need you to hire. I need to see a posting. I need to see that there's, steps to bringing someone else, or else we can't do this. Like, I think that does have to be collective too, that this is too much.
Right.
Work for,
Where where
um,
where does HR play a role in this? Because I do feel like what you all are saying is beautiful with the boundaries. But I know sometimes with the leaders I have in my workshop or even the supervisors, they don't feel comfortable enough speaking up. And then their assumption is, they know that I've picked up the extra work, right? They see my emails come through at 11 o'clock. They see that I'm doing this. They know. Why do I have to tell them when they know it's happening? And then our values are saying this. Why aren't they doing something about it? So I totally get the boundaries, but I do feel like maybe HR plays a role in keeping an eye on certain things like that. When you see that, hey, headcount went down. I do agree with you, what you said, Anita and Isabelle, about I do agree that if 3 people could do the job, maybe you didn't need that 4th person. But sometimes people are doing the job, especially now when you're remote, they're doing a job through 11-hour days. And they're expecting people to know that they're doing this and to do something about it. So when nothing is done, it's like, then you get into burnout. So what do you think HR plays a role in all of this?
Well, HR should definitely be playing a role in having programs and measures in place to protect their employees from burning out. But unfortunately, I'll say again, mainly in large corporations, like HR really works for, the leadership of the company. And they're also compensated on, meeting their own KPIs and the company's, stock options growing and things like that. So they'll often, or sometimes their hands will be tied, right? But HR is not always able to help when it comes to, it depends on the organization. And we have to remember that HR works for the people, but they really work for the leadership team.
Okay. Okay. So let's kind of switch gears. We do know that there's the hustle culture. This is being rewarded. This is being promoted. But we also know that there's organizations that do have well-being practices or reminders, like Anita was saying, hey, you got to remember to take your lunch. You got to take your vacation. What if we had to design a whole new company the right way, where well-being is not just performative, that it's real for leaders in the organizations and then therefore their employees? How would
Right.
we start to design it? What would be included in this new company?
I mean, I would like establish this culture, like wellness as really a PR strategy. So it would look like an organization, and I can give you a few examples, an
Hmm.
organization that would have a paid app on meditation, for instance, that they would make this available for their employee, or having a mandatory break, or even if you want to push it a step further, a nap throughout the day, having a CEO that publicly and talks about mental health to their employees, not only HR, like having like executive or leaders talk about it. Or it could be just having, when you're having team meetings, take a moment or two to check on the temperature of the team and how they're feeling, and ask them to share, you know, one thing that they did this week to take care of their well-being and their mental health, or brainstorm about how we could, do teamwork that would support each other even further. But it really comes, from your direct manager. I think in some cases, even more than HR, because your manager should just be practicing servant leadership and having that, honest one-on-one conversation with you about, how are you feeling? And if you have an employee that shares this, that they're feeling completely overwhelmed and burnt out, please do not ignore it. So I would say it needs to come from the leadership team. They need to really support their direct reports.
How, hmm. I'm with you on all of those things. I love it. Currently in an organization too that offers a lot of that stuff. So, and I do see, how that plays out. In some of my other organizations, I really see this there was always a lot of focus on well-being, the employees, and hey, managers, make sure you do this for the employees. But I always felt like too that there was that gap, either in executive or those middle managers who were stuck bearing the brunt that they needed to offer well-being or allow them to take their lunch or go home, whatever,
Yeah.
But they themselves were almost not given that same permission or that same grace. Have you experienced that at all? Or even Chin, have you heard that from managers on the courses that you lead? So Isabelle, have you seen, do middle managers and management, those senior execs have to, almost are they exempt with not having to take care of their well-being? Or we forget about them?
They should not. They should actually lead by example. Start by, as a leader, as a manager, take your vacation day. Again, one of the VP, one of my colleague, he would brag about, well, I took one vacation day this year. Well, that's not okay. Don't wear it as a badge of honor, because vacation is, it's going to be your time to reset and come back stronger with a clearer mind. So, and if you're doing this yourself, then you're putting that pressure on your team that maybe they should do the same and not take their vacation days, and that set expectations for your team. So the best thing they could do is just start taking care of themselves to show, the team reporting to them that they lead by example.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely leading by example. Another thing too, the idea I have is having, and we talked about this in another show, but having a safe space for them to talk about some of the pressures of work, whether it's with a coach. I know we talked in one place, Anita, about having a coach for every leader, because I think one of the things that happens, especially in that middle management, is that the executive team thinks, okay, we have leaders in place to take care of everything else, but they're not taking care of their middle managers, right? They're not checking the temperature. They're not finding, and not all of them. Some of them are really good mentors and they tell them, take your vacation, do this. But there's others where they feel crunched, like they feel in the middle and they feel like they're squeezing. So one of the things that happens in my workshops is that when everybody starts sharing, they're like, oh, I'm not alone. It's like this whole sigh of relief. I'm not alone. So even building communities, peer group communities, where they can share and understand the pressures and brainstorm, like you talked about earlier, brainstorm, how can we work together as a leadership team to support each other so that we're not adding more to each other's plate, right? But the same things that Isabelle was talking about, try to make sure that we're also creating space, whether it be the HR or the executives, creating space for that for the middle managers. And then there's this one thing that I really heard about, and I know every company can't do it this way, but this trend of no actual number of days of vacation, where it's just you take off as much as you want. I know we talked about it in another show, Anita. You were like, I would be afraid to take off too much. but basically you don't have a certain amount of days. So when you reach a certain level, you could take as many days as you want. Obviously, you still have your outcomes and you coordinate, but I do like that concept. I don't know. What do you think about that, Isabelle?
I mean, I love that idea. And if the truth is, if an organization makes the employee feel so respected and seen that they can actually take as much time off as they want, this employee in return, will just want to do more for that company. And they'll come back from vacation to, again, so well rested that they'll be more productive when they come back. So I think it needs to be something that's really I love that practice. Another practice that I've heard some companies do, and I think it's great because I always believe there's too many meetings in every organization, and sometimes we don't think about which meetings really are really necessary. And organizations will even have meetings about planning another meeting. But there's organizations that will have a full day free of meetings. And that's great because you can
Mm,
actually you can catch up on your work, and often it falls on a Friday or something. But I think that's important too for the organization at the top to make sure people's schedule is just not so overwhelming that they have no time to do their work, and so that they don't have to feel that at night they have to work all these extra hours to get the work done that they weren't able to do so in the day.
yes, I love that practice. I've implemented that in my small, tiny company. I have
Yeah.
Monday is free of meetings. I do not schedule a meeting. It doesn't matter if someone wants to. I'm like, don't schedule. And I have to be disciplined. I have to be very disciplined not to add it in case something comes up. But yeah, I love that practice. What
Yes.
about you, Anita?
I mean, I love the practice, but let me tell you how it got implemented in one organization that I worked at. No meetings before 10. Okay, so
Okay.
that was the rule. No meetings before 10 a.m. You need people to just come into work and start their day, clear their emails, things like that. So no one was allowed. Well, guess where meetings started popping up? 12 o'clock lunchtime, guys, because it's the only other time to fit in stuff. So now, not only was my morning protected, but
Uh-huh.
then my lunch hour was no longer protected. So it's crazy how we were, organizations, sometimes, again, the systems are broken and they're well intentioned. Maybe it was an HR saying, oh, let's put this great rule, no meetings before 10 because people are complaining. Great, it worked. There were no meetings before 10. But now my lunch hours, and then it became normal because I'd be like, well, when do I have time to eat? Right. And people are like,
Yeah.
no, just bring your lunch. So as long as it doesn't smell bad. So now I'm going to meetings carrying my lunch so that I can eat it. It's crazy. I was like, this is like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd rather that 9 a.m. meeting just so I can have my lunch in peace and not have to eat it in front of like 20 other people. But so I'm laughing because I do think some of these, like, in theory, they sound good and they only work if you're going to execute it. If the system is also structured well to support those. Otherwise, you're asking, leaders or employees to be well in systems that are still broken. Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
So
just
talk a
like,
little bit. So talk a little bit about that, Anita, from your organizational development eyes. How do we create a system that can encourage some of these practices that Isabel talked about? Like what does that look like? Is it like a reset, like an individual reset? Like what do you do to when you come and you see an organization systems broken that can support some of these practices?
for me, and maybe as well, you actually, because I don't have enough experience. I don't even know if this is like lived, but for me, I almost feel like if we could, whether it's coach or teach or, like you said, it does start from the top. If there's a belief in
Hmm.
well-being, a belief that we need rest, a belief in protecting our energy, which I love that you said that at the beginning, that difference between adrenaline and energy. If we could teach leaders what that actually looks like and what balance looks like, it'll just organically happen. Like the system will organically be
Hmm.
developed. I won't have to say no meetings at lunch. Like the rules will just, at least within your team, you can create different boundaries, especially if there's different hours and whatnot. But I think if everyone truly believed that it was important, right? And there weren't egos, and on how to get rid of that. So I'm in a utopian world here, guys. It's utopia.
You do the gratitude practice. That's how you quiet down the egos. You do the gratitude practice that Isabelle shared.
That's right. I remember we're going for a gratitude walk every morning. But I don't know. What do you think is about that crazy, wild idea?
I think it's about, you can expect the behaviors that you tolerate. So, yeah. So you need, again, it's about, again, setting boundaries, but it's about like leadership at the top that, sets the example and shows, permission for people to take that time off and having that culture. We mentioned like half a day off, or not half a day off, but having, no meeting day. The company I used to work for also had like Friday afternoons off in the summer. However, we would get all these meetings scheduled, even though it was a policy to get. So you really need to balance that out from the top and also have those systems in place.
What about the other practice that I have? And I'm not even a mother like you two, but the other practice, I always like, my head always blows about why the schools end at 3 o'clock when work is still going on at 5. Like, I never understood the concept. Like, no one is paying attention to the working mother. But what about creating, especially now that we know that we could do remote, what about creating your own schedule in a sense? What do you two think about that? Creating your own, like, I work at home 2 days, come here at 3 so that you can handle some things. Do you think that would help? Because I know a lot of people are making a lot of things about the return to office, but do you think giving employees more power in their scheduling and coordinating with their teams would help with well-being?
I think it can definitely help. And I think a lot of the corporations now allow people to work from home a couple of days. Where it may not fully help is when, during those days they still get. I remember I worked from home a lot too, but, days with 17 meetings, it means like your first one's at
Mm,
6 a.m. And sometimes it's just so back to back. And sometimes it's meetings on top of each other. So you're like switching in between calls. Well, the human mind is not made to be on such a high level of stress. And I would call it like more survival mode. We're not made to. I know women are really good at this, but we're not made to multitask that much. Like, it's
no,
just not. Our brain works that, we should focus on one thing at a time. So this is where, if we allow people working from home, like give them maybe a little more freedom in managing their calendar by not, scheduling 8 meetings with them that same day, right? So again, systems by organizations, that's very key, and employees also setting those loving boundaries for themselves.
exactly. Exactly. Okay. Any other things that you would want people to know about when you think about having true leadership well-being in organizations?
Well, I think, there's the whole topic of emotional intelligence, but we could have a full podcast episode on this one. I have a full chapter in my book, actually. So I think, it's a leadership skill that's like underrated. It's actually a superpower. So we need to have more of that in the business world. But I also think it's for employees to feel engaged with those objectives. So from a company KPI standpoint, it's fine to have like those sales goals and marketing goals, but really get your team and your employees engaged in setting their own objectives so that they're more engaged in that process and will probably be able to manage their time a little more. And from an overall leadership space, or not only in the corporate world but for your life, I would say like there's 4 things that because I'm an executive coach for C-suite women, and 4 things that I do to really help them reclaim their time, purpose, and energy. I focus on 4 pillars, and I think that could be helpful for a lot of people in the corporate world. Well, first of all, is to have, I guess, techniques or a program in place to really quiet down the mental noise. And I know it's easier said than done, but there's beautiful things like meditation or other practices that can be done to do that. And then I mentioned boundaries so many times in this discussion, but establishing loving boundaries in your life and at work is very, very important. And the third one would be cultivating unshakable self-trust. So you really need to love yourself first and, have health habits that will good for your mind, body, and soul. And I guess the last one is cultivating sustainable rhythms as well to really have a roadmap to help you navigate through life. So don't start. I would say don't start your day in the morning by grabbing your phone automatically, right? One of the things I do is I don't authorize myself to touch my phone at least 1 hour after I'm up. People just wake up and they just go on autopilot, right? Go brush your teeth, coffee. But I would say I start your day with intention. So if you're not into meditation, that's fine, but just take a couple of minutes, quiet down your mind and think about what's the one thing you want to achieve today. And anything else, like don't be so hard on yourself. Like just focus on that one goal for the day and work towards that. And you can say it's okay to say no. Saying no is just another level of love for you to help you be mentally well.
I love that. It's all right to say no. It's
It's all
another
right.
method to be mentally well. I love that. I love
Oh,
that. So you've been listening to us today. We're talking about reimagining leadership well-being, and we really took it from an individual perspective and really talked about some of the practices that we can start putting in. But it really starts at the top with the leaders and modeling it, right? Modeling that it's all right to take breaks, modeling that it's all right to take vacations, modeling that giving others the permission to be to take care of their well-being, right? Whether some of those practices that Isabelle just showed, whether it's quieting the mental noise, dealing with your boundaries, right? Having a rhythm and being intentional. So these are some of the things, if you're in HR or people first executive leading, asking yourself, am I creating a space to allow individuals to do these practices, right? The one of the top ones we really love was that gratitude walk that Isabelle shared with us. But what kind of spaces are we creating to allow individuals to practice this in our organizations so they can be taking care of their well-being and then at the end of the day, end up taking care of the organization? Because you can't pull from an empty cup. I like that Isabelle had that in her book. You can't pull from an empty cup. So how are we allowing the individuals in our organizations to fill their cup so that they can serve our organizations in a healthy way? You've been listening to Development Reimagined, but before I close, please, Isabelle, tell the listening audience how they can connect with you.
Yes, and I want to say thank you so much for having me because I think this conversation is so important, and we need to have that discussion more often because so many people deal with stress and are burnout at work, and they just don't even know. So if that conversation resonated with you, I want you to know that you don't have to, lead with from exhaustion. If you need support, I have my executive renewal program designed for coaching C-suite women that really want to reclaim their time, purpose, and energy. If people want to connect with me, they can send me a DM on my Instagram at Love Lead Succeed. They can also find me on LinkedIn under Isabelle Tremblay. And of course, my book is Love Lead Succeed is available on Amazon. But I hope I can connect with many of you and help you rise.
Thank you so much, Isabelle, for spending time with us. And
My pleasure.
we're grateful for it. And we're grateful for you, the listening audience. So please share your comments, your thoughts, and also reach out, especially if you're someone that this conversation resonated, reach out to Isabelle so that you can start on your renewal and your reset. Take care. Until next week.